Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So if you've hit up a trendy wine bar anytime recently, you've almost certainly seen these really cool, kind of cloudy, brightly colored bottles being poured. We are, of course, talking about Pet Nat, which is short for Pétillant Naturel, and the absolutely fascinating ancestral method used to create it. Today, we're going to uncover the science and the history behind what is, without a doubt, the world's most sought-after natural wine right now.
But what if I told you that this whole modern pet nat craze, this absolute darling of the artisanal wine world, was actually born from a medieval mistake? Seriously, it's totally true. Long before the highly engineered, super meticulously controlled sparkling wines of today were even a thought, nature basically decided to play a little trick on some completely unsuspecting winemakers.
Section 1. The Ancient Sparkling Secret. Okay, let's dive right into this and travel back to the 16th century, which is where our story officially kicks off.
Picture this. We find ourselves at the Benedictine Abbey of Saint-Hilaire in the French Languedoc. The year is right around 1530. The monks here, they were making wine just like they always did. They harvested their grapes, crushed them, let them ferment, the usual. Thinking the whole fermentation process was completely finished, they bottled the wine up as the freezing winters set in. But then spring rolls around. The rising temperatures actually woke up the yeast that had just been lying completely dormant from the winter cold. The yeast woke up hungry, started fermenting the remaining sugars right inside those sealed bottles, and created all this trapped carbon dioxide. The result? A naturally sparkling wine that literally shattered the glass bottles right there in the Abbey cellars. It was a happy, albeit pretty explosive little accident.
Now, while this super rustic method stuck around historically in places like Limoux and Catalonia, it has seen a massive resurgence today. And you might be wondering, why now? Well, it's because this ancient, completely hands-off approach perfectly aligns with today's booming natural wine movement. It is hands down the most low-intervention sparkling wine method in existence. Winemakers just let nature take the wheel, meaning the results are incredibly authentic, wild, and super expressive of the vineyard itself.
Section 2. Crafting the base wine. Let's head out into the vineyard to see how creating this accidental wine on purpose actually requires a really delicate, high-stakes balancing act.
First things first, winemakers have got to pick these grapes early, specifically before they reach what's called physiological maturity. That basically means before they hit peak ripeness and sweetness. This is absolutely crucial. By harvesting early, they lock in a lower alcohol content, usually between 10% and 11.5% by volume. But more importantly, this early harvest preserves the grape's fresh, crisp, natural acidity. It maintains the exact sugar-to-alcohol ratio they're going to need for the wild journey ahead. So whether they're using Mauzac, Gamay, or Charolais grapes, getting that early pick is step number 1.
Okay, so the grapes are pressed, and we begin the first fermentation of the juice, or the must. But here's where the suspense really starts to build. Unlike making your standard white wine, the winemaker does not let the yeast just finish eating all the sugar. Nope. Instead, when about half the sugars are consumed, they deliberately stop the fermentation in its tracks. How do they do it? They plunge the tanks into extreme cold, dropping the temperature all the way down to between 0 and 5 degrees Celsius. They literally put the yeast into a deep sleep.
Section 3. Trapping the magic bubbles. Now we arrive at the most critical and honestly, kind of dangerous part of the whole process.
So, the sleeping, unfinished wine is transferred into these heavy-duty champagne-style glass bottles. And as the wine slowly warms up in the cellar, guess what? The yeast wakes up. It starts eagerly snacking on those remaining 80 to 100 grams of trapped sugars. But because the bottle is completely sealed, that carbon dioxide has absolutely nowhere to go. It dissolves right into the liquid, creating intense, explosive pressure. We're talking between 5 and 7 kilograms of pressure here. That is exactly why winemakers have to use certified pressure-resistant bottles. If they use standard recycled glass, it would literally just detonate under that kind of stress.
They call this stage foam formation. And actually, let me clarify something. It's not really a second fermentation. It's just a continuous end of the first one. And it is highly unpredictable. The winemaker is basically walking a tightrope without a net here, trying to manage 3 really volatile variables: the sheer amount of yeast left in that bottle, the ambient temperature of the cellar, and how much CO2 was already left over from the tank. It's a completely natural single fermentation that magically creates those beautiful bubbles. And the contrast here is just striking. For those of you who know a bit about traditional champagne, you know they add what's called a dosage, a specific little mixture of sugar and yeast to trigger a second fermentation. But not here. No way. With the ancestral method, there's 0 added sugar, there's 0 added yeast. Nature does 100% of the heavy lifting. It's just an unbroken, continuous chain right from the grape to the final bubble in your glass.
Section 4. The art of disgorging. As we move into this next phase, we hit an inevitable snag. What in the world do we do with all those dead yeast cells floating around in our freshly carbonated, highly pressurized wine?
So, once the yeast finishes its meal, the cells die and form a sediment at the bottom, which is known as lees. Traditionally, to get rid of this, winemakers do this fascinating high-pressure mechanical step called disgorging. First, the bottles are stored totally upside down, so all that dead yeast slides down and gathers right in the neck of the bottle. Next, they plunge just the neck into a freezing solution, creating a solid plug of ice that traps the sediment. Then they pop the cap and boom, the intense internal gas pressure instantly shoots that frozen yeast plug right out of the bottle. They quickly top it up with a splash of the same wine and cork it for good.
But here is the really fun part. A massive trend in the modern pet nat scene is to just skip disgorging entirely. A lot of artisanal winemakers choose to leave that sediment right where it is. So if you pick up an undisgorged bottle, you're getting a delightfully cloudy, truly rustic experience. You can let the bottle stand upright if you want the yeast to settle at the bottom, or you can gently shake it up to mix it in. Doing that gives the wine these incredibly creamy, rich, almost pastry-like notes. It's so good.
Section 5, Ancestral versus Modern Methods. All right, let's wrap this up with a quick comparative guide. Consider this your cheat sheet to master your sparkling wine knowledge just in time to impress your friends at your next dinner party.
When you pour these side by side, you instantly notice the difference, right? Understanding the ancestral method really clicks when you compare its rustic, hazy, kind of raw nature against the perfectly clean, highly filtered sparkling wines you're probably more used to seeing served in a fancy flute.
Let's look at the famous Champenoise, or a traditional method first. Like we talked about, the ancestral method is a single, continuous fermentation with absolutely zero added dosage. But the Champenoise method, that's a completely different beast. They fully ferment a clean base wine first, put it in a bottle, and then explicitly add that liqueur of sugar and yeast to force a totally separate, tightly controlled second fermentation. And then you have the Charmat method, which is how Prosecco is usually made. While our ancestral pet net relies on wild, indigenous yeasts doing their thing inside each individual bottle over weeks or months to build those funky, earthy flavors, the Charmat method uses controlled, selected yeast in these massive pressurized stainless steel tanks. It's a very fast process, and it results in a highly predictable, fresh fruitiness.
So bringing all these technical differences together, the big takeaway is that the ancestral method is wonderfully uncontrolled, unfiltered, and usually meant to be popped open and enjoyed fresh. It totally embraces unpredictability. That means literally every single bottle, even from the exact same batch, might taste just a little bit different. Traditional and Charmat methods, on the flip side, are meticulously engineered for total control, pristine clarity, and absolute consistency year after year.
Oh, and before we wrap up, I've got one last surprising fun fact for you about the ancestral method. Because they harvest those grapes so early and interrupt a fermentation halfway through, the final wine usually has an incredibly low alcohol content, hovering right around 7% ABV. Plus, it naturally holds on to about 40 to 60 grams of residual sugar. So what you get is this incredibly fresh, highly acidic, lightly sweet, and dangerously easy drinking sparkling wine. Honestly, it's the absolute perfect daytime pour.
So there you have it. We've journeyed all the way from a literal monastic accident in the 1500s, right up to the delicate, deliberate balancing acts of the modern natural wine movement. You now know the unpredictable, single fermentation magic that makes the ancestral method so special. So the only question I have left for you is, which cloudy, rustic pet nat are you going to hunt down and taste for yourself at your next celebration? Thank you so much for hanging out with me on this explainer. Stay curious and keep exploring.